I left my body. I just left my body. I mean, don't tell anyone about this, and especially not any of the doctors. And suddenly I realized that I could see my own body. I see the doctors there trying to bring me back. Even back then, it planted the thought in me that I am not entirely just my body, that I am something more. I realized that this needs to be talked about. I can't anymore let people be subjected to such suffering.
Good morning, Ada. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation and coming here to Warsaw.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for letting me meet you in person because I'm a fan from Insta.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. And before we get to what I think is the most wonderful story in your life, so about your experience with clinical death, I'd like to ask you, when did you first have the courage to talk about what you went through?
The very first time that I ever spoke about my second experience with clinical death, it was during a session with the hospital psychologist. I truly believe that the psychologist understood that a young 17-year-old girl who had just gone through the trauma of clinical death would definitely need a lot of support and guidance. Support. She explained everything to me beautifully, although she ended her entire calming, incredibly soothing speech with words that also became deeply etched in my memory. That is, don't tell anyone about this, and especially not any of the doctors.
Then if you didn't tell any of the doctors, did you tell anyone in your family at first about what happened?
Yes. At first, only my mom. And
Publicly, when did you dare to do it for the first time?
in the public eye, I had already done so. Been running a blog for about a year or two, the Ghost Office. Back then, it was still an Onet blog. And suddenly, I got this offer because Eben Alexander's book was coming out, and the publishing house suggested that I go to Warsaw and talk about my near-death experience, and in some way relate it to Eben Alexander's book. So I asked my husband at the time, my husband is a scientist, and I asked him, listen, do you realize that if I go there, I will tell my story, right? The average viewership is 2 million, and 2 million people will hear it. And do you realize that some of them know I'm your wife and that this could somehow affect our interpersonal relationships? To which my husband replied, if someone decides they don't like it, then it means they shouldn't be among our friends. And he also told me something for which I'm grateful to him to this day. He told me only you have the courage. You're the only person I know who has the courage to talk about it. Yes, openly. And it's necessary for you to do it. We've already gone through a vast number of letters from people, even sent to the Ghost Office as a blog, vividly detailing the horrific nature of the nightmares they're going through. Exactly what kind of terrors are they facing? This is incredibly stigmatized and subtly pushed toward being seen as illnesses, almost mental disorders, delusions, and things like that. And then I thought to myself, my husband is always right, and this time he's right too. I'll do it. And I did.
Beautiful, wise, supportive words from your husband, because as you say, so many people, I think, have experienced such a clinical death, but still don't have the courage to talk about it yet, out loud. When I listened to other podcasts about clinical death, so many people described it in a similar way. That's why I'd like to ask you, what was your first clinical death like? Because you said there was a second one, so there were more than one.
The very first time I experienced clinical death actually occurred shortly after receiving an expired vaccine. Just to be clear, I'm not anti-vaccine. Please don't cut that out. It just happened, that's all. That's how it was. There was some chaos, and they gave me that vaccine. And I was 9 months old at the time. I ended up in a pediatric hospital. And then there was that shock from the vaccine. It was so severe that my little heart actually stopped. And that was my, a full-on, with resuscitation and everything, my first clinical death. The second was when I was 17, and the third when I was 27, but that time it was a car accident. So I'm not the only one. The record holder who wrote to me, he survived 5 of them. So it's nothing extraordinary. It's a very physiological, repeatable process. You notice this as a doctor because you understand that this repeatability matters. If everyone described it as something completely different, We could say that when people get high, they also have such hallucinations. One is flying, another is crawling. The third one, I don't know, dances, sings, and plays the drum. And here, this repeatability is like, well, childbirth, in a sense, is also describable, repeatable. It can be unique. Well, for example, for me, it was such a unique, almost mystical experience. And one, I have two daughters, so those two births were very important and were a beautiful experience for me. But physiologically, well, they weren't different from each other, right? So if we assume that in some way, physiologically, as both spiritual and physical beings, we become whole, let's say in the mother's womb, for example, then there must also be some process that reverses that situation and releases the soul, which I believe in, because I believe that people have a soul.
Can you tell me about the first clinical death you remember?
Yes. Maybe let's skip, since we talked before the show, those threads, because it would take a really long time to explain how it all happened, that there was also an earlier childhood injury and various stories like that. But generally, it looked like this. It was all very much by the book, you could say. But then at a certain unexpected moment, I suddenly felt a sharp jolt. A jolt being pulled out of my body. That's probably the simplest way to put it. And suddenly I realized that I could see my own body. I saw the doctors who were trying to restore my vital functions. And that was the first second of wondering how it was even possible that I was standing to the side, seeing my own body. I didn't feel any particular attachment to it, and at the same time, I was still myself, which already planted a seed in me. At that moment, the thought occurred to me that I wasn't just my body, that I was something more. And suddenly, the classic scenario, a light just opens up. Imagine, if you will, a vast space completely filled with a brilliant light, and from within that radiant space, something slowly approaches me or takes on a form that is clear to me, a sentient being, a being that immediately establishes communication with me on a mental level without words. So here on the left, we have the world, in which I can see what's happening to me and to my body. Here we have this being, and in a moment I realize there's yet another dimension, that this is a completely different world, unlike anything I had ever known before. And it's really hard to describe because, of course, women are famous for being able to do 15 things at once. But believe me, especially dear ladies, that this is not the same as handling 7 things at once. This is something more. It's as if you could be everything and everywhere at the same time. To be a silent observer of this vast world, and to talk with this incredibly intelligent and very warm-hearted being who simply gives the impression of being loving, and at the same time to explore this world on your own. Which I called the world on the right because I have to explain it to you somehow. There just aren't words. We don't have words to describe things like that, simply.
Were you afraid then when you were there, when you saw yourself?
No, not at all. I'm naturally curious. I was simply and genuinely interested in the unfolding situation, that's all. I observed it calmly, like it was just another significant event in my life. And then this luminous, radiant figure clearly asked me whether I wanted to stay there or whether I wanted to return to where I came from. Whether I wanted to return to my body. And I answered, after a moment, that I wanted to return because suddenly thoughts appeared about my mom, about this, about that. Well, that's the kind of experience it was. Let's say it was a conversation, but at the same time, I also knew that whatever decision I made, it would be accepted. That it wasn't like someone would punish me for not wanting to return. However, it's really hard to talk about because at the same time, my consciousness was also in that world where it had a complete structure. Honestly, if someone says it's just imagination, then I must have an unlimited one. And everyone who experienced this death and were also in similar worlds. Because it's a complete infrastructure, it's a world full of life. It's as if you moved to another city, only with very specific buildings, with different plants. I'm not a botanist, but I assume that most of them were unknown to me. It was a stunningly beautiful world, with inhabitants who seemed exceptionally peaceful and serene. They are exceptionally focused on the task at hand. And furthermore, their faces were different because they were free of stress without any tension. And I think that's what made those faces have something angelic about them. Exceptionally calm. That world functioned calmly, it wasn't so noisy. And for example, I saw a building there that caught my interest. I was immediately inside, and I saw that it was a library. Extraordinary, huge, with a dome. An entire glass dome through which they could probably observe the sky. And there were many such elements there. Among other things, that's where I met my grandmother. And what's interesting is that she was much younger, so at first I didn't recognize her because I had never known her that young. She said, "What are you doing here? This isn't your time." This isn't your time? She was worried, and maybe her concern also influenced my decision. Meanwhile, the contact with the light, with that luminous figure, was still ongoing the whole time. And because I loved her very much, and she loved me too, and I was aware that she would never say anything against me, I think I took it as yes. Looking back, I think that might have mattered to me too, that she was worried. This isn't your time. Why are you here? And that's how it was. One could talk about all of this for a very long time because it all lasted quite a while. 4.5 minutes of our linear time. The feeling of being with that being was as if it lasted much longer, a year, and exploring that world, oh my weeks. What I saw there, jumping from place to place, the Warsaw Metro is nothing, really small, that's a whole different speed.
But the thing was, whatever you thought of, you immediately found yourself
right there.
If you thought about a certain person, would they appear in front of you?
Well, apart from that grandmother who somehow ended up next to me, I didn't really think about people in particular. I was, just too fascinated by what I was seeing. There were so many different buildings, places, even some strange vehicles. I would say, without any noise, not really moving. And
Still asking about that world, what colors dominated there?
back then I didn't even know that something like so-called divine geometry existed. And everything that was there were no sharp edges, no buildings ending, let's say, with a tower. Everything was domed, enclosed, regardless of the size of the building. There was a beautiful, enormous park with plants arranged in patterns. Also, strictly following the intricate principle of this divine geometry, there were meticulously maintained flower beds, or even much larger areas of vibrant, colorful flowers, but all were deliberately and precisely arranged. Let's say it was a bit like a complex mandala, simply to provide a clearer mental image for you to visualize it. It all felt natural, and I had the irresistible impression that I was in a better version of Earth.
Did you talk to that figure in the meantime?
Yes.
And do you remember what you talked about? Among other things,
thinking about whether I should actually go back or just stay here for a while. About the fact that whatever happens, it isn't judged in any way. That's exactly what free will is about. And at a certain point, about the fact that, well, a kind of mental shortcut that soon I wouldn't be able to return anymore because there would be nothing to return to. In short, that I had to decide an earthly time now.
And it was hard to determine their gender, right?
Yes, because I didn't see. It was so bright that I couldn't see regarding the exact facial features, although many detailed accounts from people who contact me also frequently mention this, that if they actually saw facial features, for example, I have a truly fantastic account from a soldier about a shared death experience he had, and he said that a mysterious figure suddenly appeared. I personally call it a woman, simply because those specific features remind me so much of an earthly woman. Men don't have such delicate features. But what is gender, really? How would we even determine that?
And besides the library, what else did you see there?
I saw a very interesting scene where a group, let's say, of younger people was standing. I noticed that someone much older was speaking to them, someone they were all listening to very intently. And I thought to myself that I really wanted to get much closer to that specific group. So I immediately decided to approach them. Although I was unable to clearly hear his specific words, at the very same time, a second gentleman approached me and urgently informed me that there had been a terrible disaster and that every single person was desperately needed over at the hospital. And later, for many, many years, I would encounter in various places accounts from people who, as they claimed, found themselves in a spiritual hospital. And generally speaking, this spiritual hospital specifically concerned those individuals who, let's say, had suffered a truly terrible death, meaning one directly connected with a massive fire, a tragic train accident, or perhaps some kind of brutal car crash. So based on this, we can safely assume that the many souls who enter this place, in this vastly different world of theirs, this unique world of life after life, if they are filled with, or if the very last thing they remember is something truly terrible, something incredibly dramatic connected to their passing, then they probably receive, to use earthly terms, some kind of specialized psychological help, some gentle care that allows them to slowly regain their inner balance, or, who knows, maybe even completely forget how absolutely terrible the traumatic circumstances of their departure actually were. And that's an interesting point, one that for me kind of confirmed the accounts of other people who said that they really were there, that it was a very fascinating place. And in fact, this place is somewhat depicted in the film Our Home, in the film, which was made based on accounts received by the medium Chico Xavier. He is one of Brazil's most widely recognized and influential mediums, and an extraordinary individual who truly has dedicated the entire course of his life, you could say, confirmed that he really did touch those spiritual states.
And on one hand, there was this beautiful world. On the other, there was that figure. And on the third, you were observing yourself and saw your own resuscitation.
Yes.
And how long did your resuscitation last?
4.5 minutes. And
did you hear what the paramedics were saying during the resuscitation?
Yes. I heard. They were saying some things. Honestly, medical language, as you know, is hard for a layperson to remember. I just remember that one of the doctors said to the other, "Leave it, stop." Something like, "There's nothing more we can do for her," or "Nothing more will come of this." But the other one still didn't give up at all. And in fact, in earthly time, I was probably back about 10 to 15 seconds later. And much later on, I told the doctor, "You really give up much too quickly. I saw everything that was happening."
And what did the doctor say to that? What did he say?
Nothing. He ran away. And then during rounds, he would stand behind the doorframe and wouldn't come in. Then at the end, when I was leaving, because, I had it tough, I had my left side partially paralyzed and so on. I mean, I really wasn't doing well, but he happened to be the one doing the discharge paperwork. I said, but I didn't want to criticize or offend you. I just wanted to say that I saw it. And that's it. I didn't go into the details, no, but, well, they did what they could. Let's remember, this was many years ago. Now, these days, the methods might be more effective, different. Well, I don't know, but science is definitely making progress. Over all these years, it has made progress. And
right after that event, you talked about it with the psychologist.
Yes, that was exactly when the psychologist came in to see me and slowly started the conversation. Very gently, The nurses later told me, my dear child, you completely drifted away from us for quite a long moment. I said, yes, I think something like that happened. Do you remember anything from that dream? I told her everything then. She described to me other patients who also shared their memories with her. And something I will never forget, because she described it so beautifully, that she had a patient. His concerned parents brought him to see her because after his tragic clinical death, when he was just a very little boy, he began constantly making all sorts of strange and detailed drawings. Eventually, by carefully analyzing those many drawings, she finally came to the startling conclusion that to explain to the parents whether you are believers or non-believers, he remembers it, he experienced it, and he would draw this very bright figure. He used up all his yellow crayons drawing it because he wanted to emphasize that brightness as best as he could. And she asked him, did that figure say anything to you? And was there anything else there? And he kept saying just one thing: there is a light there that loves us. Nothing else. He didn't want to say more. After all, he was just a little boy. It's hard to talk about it, as I mentioned earlier, because we don't have words for it. So if it's difficult for an adult who, I dare say, has quite a large vocabulary, then how can a small child talk about it? That's an even bigger problem. Just this separation of awareness, this ability to be and do different things. I suppose that boy was experiencing something similar. And how was he supposed to talk about it? Yes, he was able to draw himself at the top of the page and himself at the bottom of the page. So he saw himself, he saw his own body.
You mentioned that the psychologist asked the boy or his family if they were religious. And here's my question for you. Are you a religious person?
Yes.
And do you think that had any influence on what you saw there?
I don't know, because I don't think so. The only influence it might have is on how people verbalize it. For example, a Buddhist or a Hindu might say, I saw Krishna, Buddha, while a Christian would say, I saw an angel. Once someone asked me if I met Jesus there. I always answer that I seem far too humble a being for that, to send the highest one for me. I think that if they have those angelic choirs at their disposal, at most they sent a little angel for me. But there are those who say they saw Jesus, or that they saw, I don't know, Mary. Well, those are just words. These are just names, words that we assign to these figures. But when it comes to non-believers, well, what can I say? Man, they've really got it tough, because first they have to even accept that this happened, and then somehow they have to consolidate it all within themselves to bring together what they've experienced with what they used to believe. And some of them actually do convert, doesn't matter to which religion, but they go through some kind of conversion, and then some just they send these accounts, for example, to me because they think it's interesting material for work, for research on consciousness, on what it really is.
Everything you're describing is truly incredible, but I'm wondering, how did this experience later affect your life on Earth?
Well, it affected me in such a way that I simply started to take an interest in what had happened to me. And years ago, my God, when it first appeared somewhere, Moody's book, Life After Life, when I found out about it, I was 17th in line. Back then, it was just one. Nowadays, we have everything at the snap of a finger, but it wasn't like that then. And only after I read that book did I realize that I wasn't alone in this, that it's a phenomenon that repeats itself. And then, over time, I started collecting all the materials I could find. I began to take an interest in all religions, in how they see it. And over time, life just gradually worked out that way, especially since I had that terrible accident. And once again, I actually died and came back to life. That simply made me go in that direction. It really, really interested me. And then over time, I founded the Office of Spirits. That personal blog which I used to write quite a long time ago, I originally started it for the fourth dimension and for the mysterious unknown world. That is exactly how it slowly and gradually developed over time. But I very quickly realized that this information truly needs to be publicized to everyone. It absolutely needs to be publicized because you simply cannot let people continue to suffer in that way, especially when they come back so fundamentally changed from their experiences to the reality just as they left it. After all, that reality hasn't changed, but they came back completely different. And now what? People change professions. Sometimes they change life partners because they can't live with someone who doesn't understand how powerful and transformative that experience was, and with someone who either mocks it or at best treats the whole transformation as one big oddity. No, you just can't live like that.
So you could say that after this event, you found your calling. Oh,
calling is a big word, but in any case, I definitely came to the conclusion that since I was already led to this, they turned me back from the final station 3 times, so it must have been for a reason. And actually, my husband helped me with this too, because from the very beginning, when we met, I told him about my experiences so that he wouldn't be surprised later on, suddenly. And I told him, I think I probably they sent me back for a reason. And my husband says, yes, because you have such a hard life. You're so resilient. You're so strong that it's so that you would start talking about it, because here no one talked about it at all.
and unfortunately, people still talk about it very little.
I'm doing everything I can to change that.
I'm really glad to hear that. But tell me, you say that you've experienced clinical death 3 times, and both the second and third times were preceded by an accident.
The second time was that illness we talked about, those complications from
The accident.
From childhood. Once my friend said, oh my God, it's like something is following you as if it wants to kill you.